Growth ETFs were popping off in 2023, and investors everywhere are hitting all-time portfolio highs so far early on in 2024. If you had a nice solid chunk of growth ETFs in your portfolio last year, you're probably feeling pretty good right now. In this video, we'll assess how my favorite growth ETF, VGT, compares to the best of the best. You're going to want to stick around for this one. I'm going to go into a little more depth than I usually do by looking back 20 years instead of only 10. We will be diving into a comparison of some of your guys' favorite ETFs that you bring up in the comments. We're going to see how my baby, VGT, compares against the following. Elite Growth ETFs, SMH, XLK, IYW, QQQ, and SCHG. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name's Jeff Teeples, and here we aim to grow your wealth with simple, time-tested solutions. Please smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop me a comment below with your favorite growth ETFs. And the last housekeeping item, I'll now be releasing a video each and every Sunday and sometimes on a Thursday. Let's grow. Growth ETFs ignite us. Growth ETFs are like the superstars in our portfolio that define our ceiling, and things tend to get a little bit spicier when investors go back and forth about their favorite growth ETFs. With cornerstone holdings like VOO or VTI, we all agree to just pick one and then take a nice nap. With dividend ETFs, we'll casually debate what is the best anchor for your portfolio. The person over here might want a slightly higher yield, while the other person might want slightly higher dividend growth, but they're all fairly stable. But with any good growth ETF, it's all about holding on for dear life as the total returns pile up over long stretches of time. Most of the ETFs that we take a look at today had a total return of over 50% in 2023 alone. But remember, a lot of these same ETFs were down 30% on total returns the year before in 2022. We all like to refer to past performance to prove that it should be my way or the highway. Then comes the finger pointing for performance chasing. And let me just say this, all the ETFs that we cover in today's video are fantastic holdings for your portfolio, as long as they're properly balanced with some cornerstone holdings and some quality dividend ETFs based on your situation and your goals. So let's all get along, relax, and review why my way is the best. VGT Reasons. I'll keep this section brief so we can move along to the fun stuff. I like the ETF VGT because I'm a tech bull and I don't see technology slowing down in the near future. I like that VGT has over 300 holdings and it includes small and mid-sized companies. We'll get into what makes each of the top growth ETFs unique in the next section. Let's first check out the key metrics of VGT.
All right, I pulled up VGT on Seeking Alpha to check out the basics. So I'm on the summary tab here, and the first thing I like to look at is the expense ratio, and the expense ratio of VGT is very low for a growth ETF, and that's at 0.10% or 10 basis points. The next thing I like to do is look at the assets under management, and I like to make sure it's at least 5 to 10 billion or higher, just to make sure the ETF is not in danger of going under anytime soon. The next thing I like to do is look under the fund profile to make sure that it is passively managed. That is a hard requirement for me on all of my ETF investing. And this fund seeks to track a specific index that I've looked up. I won't take the time to do it here, but just because it tracks an index using full replication technique doesn't mean the index itself is good. Now, I really like this technology index, and we'll get into more details about it later. VGT's holdings are 100% technology, and the top 10 holdings of VGT is very heavily weighted towards Apple and Microsoft. You can see at 21 and 20% respectively. And I'm often asked, is that scary to me? My answer is no, and that's just because of the way that the methodology works itself out within the index. If Apple and Microsoft underperform, kind of like the S&P 500, they will weight down within the index over the years. And frankly, they're the two primary reasons the index has done so well. So knowing that I don't have to actively time my exit from these two companies, the fund will take care of that for me, makes me feel better. Along with having SCHG and VOO, I'm about 9 to 10% Apple and Microsoft within my ETF holdings when you do the weighted average. And then for the dividend summary on VGT, it pays a 0.6% dividend and it's grown it at about 7.7% over the last 5 years. Seeking Alpha's had some goofy numbers lately, but I did confirm that these numbers are correct. And then we'll hit up the charting when we get into our comparisons later in the video.
It's time to call in the other heavy hitters. Best growth ETFs. There are so many quality growth ETFs to choose from. And as long as you pick one that's passively managed, low cost, and has good methodology, it's hard to screw this up with any of these selections as long as you don't try to time the market. 30% swings, both up and down, are commonplace for the ETFs we'll cover in this video. It's good to always be a buyer by dollar cost averaging each week or each month into your growth ETF holdings over many years. This is not an all-inclusive list of every single quality growth ETF. First of all, a lot of them follow the same index like FTech and VGT. I'll only have one for each thing like that. And these are just some of my favorites that have at least 10 years of history.
So we're out here on my ETF tracker that I keep up, and I've filtered for growth ETFs only. These figures are all pulled directly from Seeking Alpha's database, and they've had some dividend issues lately, and we'll discuss that here in a minute. But I currently have these sorted by 10-year total return, so a fairly zoomed out return. And as you can see, SMH, which I always refer to as shaking my head for some reason internally, has a mind-boggling 981% return, and then the other ones are more grouped up a little bit. We'll get deeper into the return data in a minute. I just wanted to point out that we're sorted by return here. So the ETFs we're going to be comparing today are SMH, and the index itself grabs 25 semiconductor companies, and the top 10% are 72%. So this is even more niche than something like XLK and VGT. Little too risky for my blood, but we'll dive into the returns here in a bit. It's done extremely well. XLK, many of you know and love, and you bring it up in the comment section quite a bit. So its assets under management are 63 billion. It's a well-established fund. It's 67 companies that are also in VGT. It's a little more concentrated with large cap companies. You can see its top 10 holdings are nearly 70%. Its expense ratio is 0.09. That's really good. So this is interchangeable to me with VGT. VGT, we've already talked about, it's well funded with $72 billion. It's very top heavy, just like XLK and IYW. And its expense ratio is about the same as XLK at 10 basis points. And then QQQ, and I would recommend QQQM. It's the same thing with the lower expense ratio, but QQQ has the history, so that's why I have this on here to pull the data. It's a huge fund at $251 billion under management. It's 100 of the largest companies on the NASDAQ, so it's self-updating much like the S&P 500, and I really like that about it. And it's about 50% tech, so not as tech heavy as everything here above it. Its top 10 holdings are only 47%. It's a little more well balanced. And its expense ratio is 15 basis points if we talk about QQQM. But QQQ itself is 20 basis points. And the last one we're going to look at in the compare process is SCHG. A lot of people bring this one up quite often. 25 billion of assets under management, and it has 251 holdings, with its top 10 holdings being 56%. It has the lowest expense ratio of all these growth funds at a razor thin 4 basis points. I do like that about SCHG. And it's well diversified, much akin to QQQ with its holdings compared to these tech heavy ones. In the next section, we're going to see how these monster growth ETFs compare to one another.
So, which is best? It's time to see how these heavyweights have fared over the past 20 years. Normally when I show these total returns and these back tests, I like to take a growth ETF and a dividend ETF just to explain how the floor and ceiling works in a more balanced portfolio. But in this one, we're going to take a look at each of these growth ETFs in a vacuum. I can't stress enough, just know that these shouldn't be your only holdings within your portfolio. This is strictly for the growth section.
All right, it's time to check out these juicy returns. So I still have VGT pulled up on Seeking Alpha, and I'm on the charting tab now. And before we dive in versus all the peers, and I'll pull them all in here, I want to show how well growth ETFs that are primarily tech-based have done in the last 10 years versus the market. And there's no guarantee this will happen in the next 10 years. But if we look at year to date in 2024, we have VGT at 7% and the market at 5.5%. And this is total returns. Zooming out 1 year, we're at 42% to 22. When we zoom out 3 years, VGT's at 37 and VU's at 32, so a little closer there. Taking it out 5 years, we have 189 versus 96. And when we zoom out 10 years, these growth ETFs have gone bonkers. VGT's at 535 and the market is at 229. Because I want to pull in as many tickers as possible, we're going to lose VU, but just know that everything we're going to look at has absolutely destroyed the S&P 500 in the last 10 years. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time. I've pulled up the competition. I have them in order, spoiler alert, of best 10-year return. And I'd like to mention that VONG and VUG did not make the cut. They did not place ahead of any of these on the 10-year returns. So these are the ones we'll be looking at. And I know a lot of people on the channel talk about SMH along with SCHG and QQQ and XLK. So I tried to grab the best ones and the ones that are talked about, which oftentimes are one and the same. So when we look at year to date so far, SMH is up 16%. It's done amazing out of the gates. XLK and VGT are right around 7%, along with SCHG. And then you have IYW a bit higher at 9%, and QQQ is trailing a little bit at about 5%. Let's stretch it over the last year. SMH is still kicking butt and number one at 63%. We have number two, IYW at 54%. And then everything else is kind of clumped together here around 42, 43%. When we zoom out 3 years, SMH is still number one so far at every interval at 62%. And XLK, I think they're almost in order here, is at 51%. IYW is at 45%. VGT is at 37. We're slightly out of order here. We go SCHG is at 32 to QQQ's 30% total return. All right, now we're pulling in the last 5 years. SMH is still in number one by a long shot at 316%. XLK is eking it out against IYW at 210 to 205%. VGT is a bit behind those ones at 189. QQQ is at 159. It passed SCHG at 142. And now when we zoom out 10 years here, SMH is still the champion, wow, at 962. XLK comes in second at 557, and IYW is still slightly outperforming VGT at 541 to 535, and QQQ is now running away from SCHG for second to last place at 429 to 329. And I wanted to point some out here. The largest companies, which XLK holds more of compared to VGT, for example, have outperformed the small and mid cap over the last 10 years by quite a bit. VU is actually ahead of VTI by 18% total return, which is a big gap. They usually stay neck and neck over the years. So the last 10 years, the VGTs and the VTIs of the world that include small and mid haven't fared very well against the ETFs that are a little more concentrated. But now we're going to zoom it out 20 years to 2004, February 2nd, sure, and 2024, February 13th. So we can see right away that SCHG actually doesn't have the history. I'm going to get rid of it here. It only goes back to 2009. So we're going to close out of that one. These ones all have been around. So now if you look at it, QQQ was lagging before, but it's actually the top performer in the last 20 years. You'll also notice that VGT has outperformed IYW. So it actually outperformed by a decent amount when you take the first of the 2 decades. And you can see it's VGT is ahead of XLK in that time as well. We know it's lost in the last 10 years, but it's actually outperformed overall in the last 20 years. I mean, they're basically pick a day and they'll be neck and neck. But the point is, the first of the 2 decades, VTI and VGT did very well. The last decade, it's been mostly the large caps, which is concentrated in things like this and VU compared to VTI. What will the next decade be? Your guess is as good as mine. So I like to roll with pulling in a few more tech companies, knowing that I'm already highly exposed to the tech sector in general. Oh, and I should mention, SMH is still very solid over the last 20 years. It comes in second place behind QQQ. So just the NASDAQ 100 not only has 39 years of absolutely obliterating the S&P 500, and that includes multiple recessions and the .com, but it's only had 7 down years ever in its 39-year history, and it has the greatest overall return when we zoom out 20 years. And just for fun here, let's go ahead and add in SPY to grab the S&P 500. Over the last 20 years, the S&P 500's total return is 541 compared to this of the growth stocks. And again, that's over 20 years. We never know what's going to happen the next year or 2 or 5, but generally speaking, when we zoom out, the growth is good. It's just the number one rule is just don't sell when the market is crashing. Us humans just tend to do it backwards.
Buy and hold. As I mentioned earlier, the best way to invest in growth ETFs is to dollar cost average in. When the market's starting to look really high, buy. When the market crashes, definitely buy. If it's staying about flat, sell. I'm kidding. Buy, buy, buy. Growth ETFs usually always look expensive. The PE ratios are higher naturally with growth companies, and the fundamentals usually look alarming in a vacuum compared to value companies. Dollar cost averaging really is your friend here, and the reason I keep emphasizing this is I know just from talking to other investors, with growth ETFs always looking expensive, we tend to hold back and wait on buying it, and there's a little more timing the market involved, it seems like, from my observations. But when you dollar cost average in to your target allocations within your portfolio, so let's say you have 3 primary sections, your cornerstone, your dividends, and your growth, you'll naturally buy up that dip in real time without having to ever make a prediction. When growth ETFs are shooting up to the moon like they did last year, you'll do a lot more buying naturally of your dividend and cornerstone section to bring them back up to their allocation. And when the growth ETFs crash, and they will, we don't know when, but they absolutely will crash, that target allocation is going to be weighed down. So when you dollar cost average new money in, you'll be buying that growth at a discount. This is a way to not have to guess if it feels high right now. Set your portfolio allocations and stay the course for multiple years, and it will add up way faster than it feels like it should. Check out one of these 2 videos right here if you want to continue down that path towards your version of financial freedom. Thanks for watching, and I will see you here each and every Sunday, and sometimes on a Thursday. Peace.